Yeah, good morning, Internet, though. It's Uncle Lou here. Your season is over video and top 25 video are coming out today, this afternoon. Your season is over video will be out first after lunchtime. The new top 25 video will be out but after that. And then tonight's call-in show, which is normally at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, we're going to do it at 7 o'clock tonight because the playoff rankings show comes on at 7. They're releasing the first playoff rankings. So that's your schedule for today. But do y'all remember how sad we all were, though, when Tennessee got rid of Butch Jones? Not because we were worried they were going to bring some amazing coach in and get good. No, I mean, we all know it doesn't matter what coach they bring in. They're not going to be good. So it wasn't that. It was the entertainment value, right? Now, one of my favorite things to do to punish myself in general is to watch coaches' press conferences. They're generally a waste of time and boring, and the coach doesn't tell you anything, and what he does tell you is usually a lie, and they're boring, and they don't answer the questions, and blah, 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 blah. But there's a handful of coaches that the press conferences are must-see TV, and that was Butch Jones. Every Butch Jones press conference was a circus, was a sideshow, was a stand-up comedy routine. The guy stuck his foot in his mouth every time he opened it. Everything from the whole Life Champions routine to the speech he gave about leadership reps, the comment he made about recruiting where he said, well, yeah, we don't get any good 5-star players, but we get 3-star players with 5-star hearts. You remember that? Anyway, it was just on a brick by brick group of individuals, all these kinds of things. Butch Jones was the gift that just kept on giving every time he opened his mouth at the press conference. So when he left the SEC, damn, that's going to be missed from an entertainment perspective and from a video making perspective, honestly. Then Mike Leach came into the SEC, and I said, well, maybe Mike Leach can pick up some of that slack. And yeah, Mike Leach has provided some entertaining quotes and some ridiculous commentary in his couple of years so far in the SEC. Dan Mullen at Florida, though. Dan Mullen is the new Butch Jones in terms of press conferences. And in terms of records, too, if you really want to look at it that way. But anyway, I digress. Dan Mullen is the new Butch Jones. If you're not watching Dan Mullen press conferences, I don't know what you're doing with your life. Forget all this sitting down and scrolling through Netflix for 45 minutes to try to find some good movie that you saw 20 years ago and all of a sudden you pretend like you want to watch it again just because there's nothing else on Netflix. Stop wasting time with that. Get off the Hulu and everything else. Go to YouTube. Just watch Dan Mullen press conferences all day. Yesterday was probably the best one yet. Now, he's obviously in a bad mood and frustrated. And, the media down there in Florida, let's give the Florida media some credit. They ask the tough questions down there of Dan Mullen. Not every sport, or not the media that follows every sports team doesn't always do that. Right, Georgia media? But so they ask the tough questions. But so Dan Mullen gets asked a question right after the Georgia-Florida game about the talent gap between Georgia and Florida, which is obvious and apparent, right? And his answer to that question was basically talent gap. Well, we beat them last year and they beat us this year. So that was his answer, which is a non-answer. And then yesterday, of course, we had the big one. He was asked again specifically this time about recruiting. The talent question was basically a recruiting question without using the word recruiting. Yesterday, they straight up asked him, do you think you need to do something different recruiting-wise, or are you happy with the recruiting, blah, blah, a recruiting question? And, of course, Dan Mullen gave the now infamous answer that I'm sure you all have heard. We're in the season right now. We'll do recruiting after the season. Hey, clown, Mullen. Recruiting season is 365 days a year, brother. This is the problem. See, I told Florida fans and everybody else this because this was something that was known about Dan Mullen. He doesn't like recruiting. He's an X's and O's guy. I'm dead serious. Dan Mullen, to me, would be a better NFL guy than college guy. I do think Dan Mullen loves the intricacies of the game of football, the scheming, the X's and O's, the play calling, the designing specific plays or sets of plays to go against a specific defense that he's playing this week, things like that. And at times he has been really good at doing that. He is not good at running a program, and he's terrible at recruiting because he doesn't like recruiting. Is there anything you're good at that you hate doing? I hate doing yard work, so I'm not very good at it. I'll just be honest. I do the bare minimum, and this is how Dan Mullen is with recruiting. He doesn't like it. And apparently he doesn't get it. And you know, Kirby, the Kirby's post game comments were directed at Dan Mullen without addressing Dan Mullen directly, right? Kirby said after the Georgia-Florida game, you have to recruit. He said the best coach in the world cannot outcoach recruiting. And that's true. That's true. Now, the most talented team doesn't win 100% of the time. We know that. There's upsets every weekend in college football. But the reason upsets are so fun is because they're rare. And the reason upsets are rare is because talent wins, especially in college football, where the talent discrepancy can be so wide. In the NFL, it's a little more even because of the way they structure the draft, and the worst teams draft first, and you know, some other things. But in college, just look at the top 10 in recruiting year in and year out, and then look at the final rankings of every season year in and year out. You see a lot of the same teams that are in the top 10 in recruiting are in the top 10 at the end of the year, right? It's just ridiculous to pretend that recruiting doesn't matter. I mean, I think we all know now that it does. And Kirby, I have a line I use all the time. College football is 90% recruiting, 10% coaching. Kirby Smart varies a little bit from that philosophy, but not much. Kirby said after the Georgia-Florida game that college football is 25% scouting or evaluation, 50% recruiting, and 25% coaching. So whatever, but the point is, the recruiting is the single most important factor in all of college football when it comes to winning, and winning consistently at a high level. Yes, you can have a team loaded with seniors and maybe a generational player at QB that can take a team that doesn't have top 10 talent overall, and you can have a great year, right? This is what happens every 4 or 5 years with teams like Minnesota, Northwestern, Iowa State, teams like that. The teams that are in the top 5, the top 10, year in, year out, every single year almost, those are your teams that are recruiting in the top 10. Dan Mullen is basically, it almost looks like Dan Mullen is trying to get fired at this point. It looks that way. The press conference yesterday was one of the worst I've ever seen. The guy asked a question about recruiting. He gave the most ridiculous answer I've ever heard. We're in the season. We'll talk about recruiting when it's recruiting season. Right now it's football season. No, it's always recruiting season, Dan. And then he basically said, next question, and just brushed the reporter aside, answered a couple more questions, and then shut the press conference down early, and now has canceled all media availability for the rest of the week for all Florida coaches and players. No more talking to the media this week for the Florida players or coaches. And this is where Dan Mullen fails, or one of the ways he fails as a head coach. He's not good at running a program. Like I said, I'm willing to give Dan Mullen some credit for some of his offensive acumen, as it were. But just because you're a good coordinator, or just because you're a good play caller, just because you can scheme something up on a grease board, that does not necessarily make you a great head coach. It just doesn't. It's a totally different skill set to be a head coach and to run a program than it is to do anything else on a college football team. Take a guy like Sam Pittman. Sam Pittman has never ran an offense. He's never been a coordinator of any kind at any level, ever. He now has become a head coach. He's better at running a program than Dan Mullen is. I'm not saying that Sam Pittman is a better coach or offensive mind or any of that than Dan Mullen. I'm just saying, I'm just making the point. Good head coaches are good head coaches because they possess certain traits or qualities. those traits and qualities aren't necessarily the same as what makes a good offensive or defensive coordinator. Some people are just not cut out to run a program. Will Muschamp is a prime example of Dan Mullen, but defensively, right? No one likes clowning on Will Muschamp more than I do. I mean, he's at Georgia now, so I'll leave him alone, but he's an elite defensive mind. I mean, and you can say what you want. You can disagree with that if you want. But you go around and you ask people who know. I bet if you ask Nick Saban to name the top 5 to 10 defensive minds in all of college football, Will Muschamp would be on that list. Will Muschamp's an elite defensive mind. It didn't translate to being a good head coach, though, did it? No. He fell on his face and failed miserably at not 1 but 2 different SEC schools. Just because Dan Mullen was the offensive coordinator at Florida when Tim Tebow happened to be there under Urban Meyer does not somehow mean that Dan Mullen is now an elite head coach 14 years later. Dan Mullen is not an elite head coach. He's not. And he never will be. He doesn't possess the traits and qualities necessary to be a good or a great head coach. He doesn't have them. And his attitude towards recruiting, where do you work? Wherever you work, the attitude of the people under you is a reflection of your own attitude, of the boss's attitude, right? If you've got a strict boss, where if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late, and you better be on time back from your lunch break, and your shirt better be tucked in, and this and that. That type of attitude trickles down below. The opposite is also true. If you've got a lazy boss who doesn't care and shows up late half the time, well, the people underneath them are going to start doing the same thing. If you've got a head coach that clearly does not understand the importance of recruiting and is not interested in recruiting at all, that trickles down as well. So no, the head coach is not solely responsible for recruiting, obviously. Ask Kirby Smart, again, what he looks for when he goes out and hires assistant coaches. One of the things on the list is you better be a good recruiter. Dan doesn't value recruiting. He just doesn't. Clown Mullen does not value recruiting. Dan Mullen thinks that with average players, he can out-scheme the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Ohio States, the Oklahomas. The reality is he can't and he won't. Will there be a year every once in a while like last year where Dan Mullen, through no credit of his own, by the way, those were not his players last year. Those were not Dan Mullen's players. Florida fans, you can thank Jim McElwain for Kyle Trask, okay? And those receivers in the Pitts. They had nothing to do with Dan Mullen. So can he have a year like that every 4 to 5 years at Florida? Probably. It pains me to say that as a Georgia fan because I'd like to beat Florida every year, win the East every year, blah, blah, blah. Dan Mullen with the talent, Florida as a university is going to attract a certain amount of talent regardless of who the head coach is. You have a high floor when it comes to recruiting at Florida. You're never going to finish 90th in the country in recruiting at the University of Florida. You're just not. There's too many good players down there, and Florida is too big of a brand. So you're starting with a huge built-in advantage as the head coach at Florida when it comes to recruiting. The problem with Dan Mullen is he's sitting on that floor, 15-ish, 10 to 15-ish in recruiting, not cutting it. Dan Mullen doesn't have a single top 10 player committed for next year out of the state of Florida. If you go look at the top 10 recruits in the state of Florida next year, none of them are committed to Florida. He doesn't have a single top 100 player in the country, not one for next year. And in addition to getting his booty hole ripped open by Kirby Smart, Georgia, and me last week, his top 2 commits for the 22 class decommitted before the Georgia game. One the week before the Georgia game, one the week before that during Florida's bye week. You can't survive that way. You cannot survive that way. And when you have the head coach coming out and giving press conferences, how he had to know. Look, Every school, but particularly a school the size of Florida, with an athletic department the size of Florida. And as much as I hate Florida, by the way, they've got one of the best run athletic departments in the country. This isn't a secret. This is a well-known, established and documented fact around the college world that Florida's athletic department is top class. They've got PR people there. Dan Mullen has public relations people. He had to know these questions were coming about recruiting. He had to know that. You don't go out to these press conferences unprepared. You should be able to know almost every single question that's going to be asked. In the case of Dan Mullen, you know you're going to be asked about the Anthony Richardson injury. You know you're going to be asked about Anthony Richardson versus Emory Jones and how are you going to handle that going forward. And based on the questions he was asked after the game, he had to know yesterday that he was going to be asked about recruiting. And when they asked him about it, he acted like it blew his mind. He acted insulted by it. And then he gave a ridiculous answer where he basically told you what he really thinks. Wasn't it Maya Angelou says, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Well, Dan Clown Mullen, I believe you, sir. I believe you that you think there is a separate football season and recruiting season. I believe you 100% because the recruiting backs that statement up. It's just an embarrassment and a shame. And again, like the Willie Taggart situation at Florida State, Uncle Lou was right here and the Florida man was wrong. I had people telling me for 3 years, Dan Mullen will win the SEC before Kirby wins it again. Dan Mullen will win a natty before Kirby wins one. Dan Mullen will be at Florida longer than Kirby will be at Georgia. Kirby is only winning for this reason or that reason. Kirby was only winning because the East was down. Now that Dan Mullen is in town, things are going to change. But no, and you know what? Things have changed. Georgia has climbed further up the ladder, and Florida is slipping further down the drain. They're circling the bowl. Florida is. Dan Mullen right now is the turd that won't flush. A lot of Florida fans are looking to flush right now. I don't think Florida's going to fire him unless Florida loses 2 more games. Florida loses 2 more games and goes 6-6, they might fire him. They might fire him then. South Carolina, hard to see Florida losing that game, but I don't know. Florida could be in give-up mode. Florida's an 18-point favorite against South Carolina. I'll take South Carolina the 18 points. I think Florida probably wins. But if Florida comes out in give-up mode, the game could be over before it starts. And that game at the end of the year against Florida State, how embarrassing for Dan Mullen is it going to be if he has to look up a year from now and Florida State is looking down on Florida? Think about how low Florida State was and how long they were down there. Florida State hasn't made a bowl game in how many years? Right now, Florida State looks better than Florida. If you have watched Florida State play the last couple of weeks, they look better than Florida right now. That would be unacceptable to me if I was a Florida fan. Absolutely unacceptable. When Dan Mullen showed up at Florida, Florida was a better team and a better program than both Florida State and Miami. Today, Florida State and Miami appear to be in better shape than Florida, and that should be unacceptable to every Florida fan. Every Florida fan. But I'm not a Florida fan, and I'm not a Florida man. If it was up to me, I'd give Dan Mullen a 10-year extension.